for our panel discussion on digital populism, focusing on the relationship between cyberspace and religious populism in 5 crucial cases in West and South Asia, in India, Indonesia, Pakistan, Malaysia, and Turkey. Our panel today are authors of our recently published report on this topic, which is available to read directly online or to download as a PDF on the ECPS website. And we warmly encourage those of you who haven't had a chance to read the report to head to the site and take a look, download it, and have a read. So allow me to introduce our esteemed panel. The lead author of our report is Professor Ihsan Yilmaz. Professor Yilmaz is Research Professor and Chair at the Alfred Deakin Institute for Citizenship and Globalization at Deakin University in Melbourne. And his most recent publication is Creating the Desired Citizen, Ideology, State and Islam in Turkey. And that was published with Cambridge last year. Dr. Ali Salim is an Associate Professor in Public Policy at the Center for Public Policy and Governance at Forum Christian College in Lahore in Pakistan. And his first book, State Nationalism and Islamization, Historical Analysis of Turkey and Pakistan, was published by Palgrave in 2017. Dr. Mahmood Pagu joins us from Melbourne, where he's a research fellow at Deakin University. He's the author of Secularization of Islam in Post-Revolutionary Iran, published last year with Routledge Press. And we're joined as well by Dr. Shaiza Shukri. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science at the International Islamic University in Malaysia. And Dr. Shukri has a background in research on Turkey, but has been more recently writing extensively on populism in her home country of Malaysia. We're joined as well by Mr. Sham Ismail. He's a strategic analyst and the founder of stratc.com, which covers a range of issues, including terrorism, from a Southeast Asian perspective. And finally, we're joined by Ms. Kainat Shakil. She's a non-resident research fellow at the ECPS, and she's just arrived in Melbourne, Australia to begin her PhD at Deakin University. So today we're going to proceed as follows. First, Professor Yilmaz, who's the lead author of our report, will introduce it and give an overall flavor of the report. And then each of the panelists will present briefly for around 10 minutes each on key sections of the report covering the country cases. And then once our distinguished panelists have presented, we'll have the chance to open up the floor for a wonderful Q&A session at the end. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Professor Yilmaz to introduce the report.
Thank you. I will share my screen. Can you see it now? So, yes, the report's title is Religious Populism, Cyberspace and Digital Authoritarianism in Asia. And we have 5 cases here: India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Pakistan, and Turkey. These are all democracies. Some of them used to be democracies like Turkey, but more or less they have, despite their faults, their democracies function. They have multi-party elections. They compete at the elections, these political parties. And populism is one of the dimensions of the political and electoral processes in these countries. So we wanted to look at these countries, how especially religious populism make an impact. Asia is the largest continent, and about percent of the internet users all over the world reside in Asia. And countries like India, Indonesia have huge populations. Indonesia is the largest in terms of population Muslim country and largest Muslim democracy as well. India is the largest democracy in the world with more than 1 billion people. And in these countries, populists either have come into power or they've been influential forces on the political process and sometimes the rulers. In Turkey, in Pakistan, we have Islamist populist in power. In India, we have Hindutva populists in power, and in Indonesia and Malaysia, religious populists have been very influential on politics, and sometimes rulers have cooperated with them, and they've been in some cases informal alliances with them. What we did in this report, we first of all looked at the digital authoritarianism aspect. I'll move on to the table of contents. So in the digital authoritarianism aspect, we followed the conceptual framework of Freedom House, and they divide this issue into three, look at the issue from three different dimensions: obstacles to access, limits of content, and violations of user rights. So these are the general, I would say, secular authoritarian practices. And then we apply these three dimensions into each country case: India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Pakistan, and Turkey. Then in the last section, what we did was to look at the religious dimension, how faith is being used for these electoral authoritarian practices, and is the digital authoritarianism. And the first issue we addressed is the religious justifications of internet curbs by the government. So in terms of morality, in terms of social ills, etc., how the governments justify their digital authoritarianism by using religion. And in the second subsection here, we look at how civilian religious leaders justify or support these digital authoritarianism, or how they make demands from the rulers with religious justifications. And then thirdly, which is a huge issue in some countries, sometimes these issues end up with violence as well. Laws to limit blasphemy, heresy, heterodoxy, and pornography. And the last, how these authoritarian rulers impose more restrictions on religious minorities, or in areas where religious minorities live in large numbers. And we, of course, in the report have an executive summary, but I'll just finish with the key findings of our survey here. First, the future of especially fragile democracies is highly intertwined with digital space. And secondly, there is an undeniable nexus between faith and populism, which offers an insight into how cyberspace and politics offline have become highly intertwined. Thirdly, religion and politics have merged in these 5 countries to shape cyber governance. Fourth, the cyber governance policies of populist rulers mirror their undemocratic, repressive, populist, and authoritarian policies offline. And fifth, morality is a common theme used to justify the need for increasingly draconian digital laws and the active monopolization of cyberspace by government actors. And the last, Islamistan hindered for trolls feel an unprecedented sense of cyber empowerment, hurling abuse without physically seeing the consequences or experiencing the emotional and psychological damage inflicted on their victims. And in several our cases here, these trolls have been supported by governments. In some cases, they are funded by these governments. And with this, I'll stop and I'll hand over to Mahmoud to explain the framework and conceptual perspective more. Thank you.
Yeah, hello everybody. Thanks, Hassan, Simon, and ECPS for inviting me and for providing the grounds to publish this report. I'm going just to give a brief of the general trend in literature, what's going on in digital cyberspace and democracy. And just to start with, our say, imaginary, social imaginaries about dictators in the last, say, century, probably more in the last, probably 5-6 decades, having around two main images. One was the kind of dumb sultan, what kind of, just primitive, technologically backward, dictators who have been ruling people. They didn't have access to any new technologies or something. Their main, instruments of power have been brutal force, and more recently, the traditional media, mass media, such as TVs, radio stations, print media, newspapers, and so on and so on. And like one manifestation of this kind of dictatorship probably could be seen in, the very interesting movie Dictator, which was starred by Sacha Cohen. The other more sophisticated social imaginary about the despots are these Orwellian high-tech dictators, which, they are so sophisticated. They know how to manipulate people. So they are, at least in strangely very sophisticated image of dictators, which Orwell, kind of draws for us. They know how to manipulate even language, how to control you. This image also, has been hanging around in our Western kind of social imaginaries from so. In the last few decades, there has been some kind of, new trends of democratization. And we have seen that many previous authoritarian regimes are kind of transitioning, or at least it was the concept, or it was the perception that they are transitioning to democracy. But by time, we realized that apparently these kind of transitory state of previously authoritarian regime is not that much transitioning. They are there. They have come to stay there in between democracy and authoritarianism. So like look at, many of the Soviet Union, previous states of Soviet Union, they have adopted some forms of institutions of electoral, elections, democracy, like Russia, like Belarus. Okay, one case is interesting case is Iran, but at the bottom, they are basically authoritarian. They don't allow real participation. So elections are sham, they're manipulating. So it was kind of learning curve of authoritarian regimes. So political scientists have come up with new terminologies for them, like electoral authoritarianism. Some of them they call pseudo democracy, and such are lots of them. And in the last decade, from 2010 and around that, Arab Springs, Iranian, Green Movement, and many similar movements happening around the world. Most of them was kind of inspired and empowered and kind of facilitated by the digital, by the widespread use of emerging and new digital technologies, especially social media. And so again, people started, lots of optimism. Okay, it seems that, again, the age of these authoritarian regime is coming to end, or at least with this widespread implementation of, new technologies, they are on retreat, or they have to some kind of, limit, it will limit their powers, and so on and so forth. What we have seen after that, actually, Iranian Green Revolution, which was also sometimes called Twitter Revolution, or Arab Spring, in other different situations you had. Some of them, probably most of them, they were not successful. but later on, authoritarian regimes again adapted themselves to these new situations. Many of them adopted these emerging technologies and also developed even new, very innovative technologies of manipulation. And so instead of, against the previous optimism about the role of social media, internet, digital, technologies on how they will help democracies and grassroots people, movements, and it looks like, or at least many started doubting it, that no, it's not going to happen. Apparently, authoritarian regimes, are smart. They know how to adapt and adopt new technologies, and they've mastered, in digital manipulations or digital instruments of manipulation. And some of these digital manipulations, as we have mentioned, and probably more meticulously and sophisticatedly in this report, you may call censorship, different levels of censorship, not just, you may call it a smart censorship, which is also enabled or empowered by new advances in artificial intelligence. So it's not just a, altogether banning or blocking one website. It's more sophisticated. Then disinformation campaigns. Then you have manipulation of elections by voter engineering, influencing voter behaviors, and micro-targeting of, voters and those kind of stuff. And then cyber attacks, internet shutdowns, and surveillance. Apart from what's happening in what we call the general, digital technologies, from again the same time that we were starting to become optimistic about the role of internet, there was one very, very significant technological, say, breakthrough, which was an artificial intelligence has been there. But from around 2010, there were a few theoretical, say, breakthroughs in artificial intelligence, neural networks, machine learning. And then because of this huge expansion of internet, there was a huge, immense data to use and kind of optimize all of these, artificial intelligence algorithms. With this, then a new, a new kind of power, those who hold those, say, technologies, they got the new kinds of, power over public opinion, over manipulation of behavior, manipulation of, public opinion, manipulation of opposition leaders, and all of this. And I guess this is one of the scariest, consequences or scenarios we have right now. Fortunately, most authoritarian regimes, except for one, they don't have these advanced technologies. But there is one. So that's China. And based on many studies, authoritarian regimes are very actively, proactively are importing these technologies from China, and China is providing them. And it remains to be one of the biggest concerns that these authoritarian regimes are posing for the future of democracy in their own countries, but recently even as a risk and threat to the broader democratic world. With if countries like Iran, China, Russia, sometimes Turkey, very actively, they engage in a kind of concerted misinformation, global misinformation campaigns to undermine, the democratic systems and institutions in other Western countries. And so it's not just about the domestic, undemocratic or authoritarian practices, but it's becoming a kind of global, threat also. So I guess I just want to also add it's not in the report, but this is also important that, again, the combination of this artificial intelligence and more recently with behavioral science also is one of the really scary, I mean, trends that's happening, you know. And this is not really, it's very difficult. You can probably see how those who have all the, you know, all the information, but they have access to this kind of national information, and they know the rules the humans, you know, behave with, you know, recent advances in behavioral sciences. They completely can manipulate, you know, public opinion. They play with opposition, you know, they play with the messaging. They know how to frame, you know, and design their, say, digital outputs, their message, so that it's better understood, it's better communicated, it's better justified, you know, by the populace. And this is really scary, and we can see some signs of it in how these regimes are investing on it and how successful is it. Look at these conspiracy theories, they're all driven and powered by this combination of artificial intelligence and behavioral sciences. The kind of messaging they go and say target, the kind of communication, the kind of human, you know, cognitive biases they are investing on it. And these are very systematically, I guess, working on it. So whether in domestic politics, whether in global, you know, or international or global scene, it's really dangerous. Anyways, I guess I just stop here, and probably we can discuss more in the Q&A. Thanks for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mahmoud. Now we turn to Dr. Ali Salim to discuss his case in the report.
Thank you, Simon. So I'm going to discuss India. And as you know, India is a very important country. You know, very soon it is going to become the, you know, with the biggest population in the world, and it is also a internet superpower in terms of number of people using the internet or social media companies like Facebook and Twitter and WhatsApp and other companies. So while digital authoritarianism is important, this should be kept in mind that in case of India, digital authoritarianism is part of the broader authoritarianism that is being practiced in India since 2014 election of Narendra Modi, the current Prime Minister. If we look at Freedom House and its details about democracy, it has last year it was India was relegated from democracy to partial democracy because of the fact that it has many restrictions as far as democracy, elections, free and fair elections, and operation of you know, rights of minorities and as well as opposition parties. So coming to digital authoritarianism, India has more than 560 million internet users. It is only second to China in terms of people using internet. It has more than 500 million mobile internet users. Very few international media companies and content providers can ignore India and still compete with their rivals. So this gives India a power which most of the other countries don't have. So obviously, except for China or the US, no country is as powerful as India in terms of internet, you know, companies or social media companies. So looking at the three issues which have been used, or the criteria which has been used to see or to measure or estimate the limits of digital authoritarianism. The first one is limitations of access. So India is #1 in terms of internet shutdowns in the world, and it has been #1 for the last 3 consecutive years. So this shows the level of limitation of access in case of India. If we look at and we have given this big figure in the report, that there were in 2020 there were 109 internet shutdowns in India, and which were the highest in the world. The second one was only 6 internet shutdowns. So this shows the level of internet shutdown, or the level of internet limitation of access in India. Indian internet shutdowns are not only done by the federal government or the union government in India, but they are also done by the provincial governments. They were done in such flimsy cases as exams. So if there are some provincial or state level examinations, states may and states have used internet shutdowns to stop cheating. So that's the level at the state level, where Indian states have big populations, maybe 50-60 million population, bigger than many European countries, and you have internet shutdown because of an exam of some university. Another issue with internet shutdown is that Indian government, under the law, doesn't have to inform the people that there is going to be a shutdown or how long it is going to last. So you have to go to a court to ask when this internet shutdown is going to end, and why this shutdown was done. And most of the time, the Indian government answers that it was a precautionary measures, or there was some terrorist threat or something else. So very vague descriptions of internet shutdown of millions of people. Most of these internet shutdowns have happened in a particular state, which is the Jammu and Kashmir state, which was until recently one of the only Muslim majority state in India. When recently it was divided and it was relegated to a federal territory, its status was taken away. Of course, this should be kept in mind that while most of the internet shutdowns have come under Prime Minister Modi, this was not something which was started by Modi. So it has been done by previous regimes, previous governments in India, by Congress governments, but the level and the extent of internet shutdown is unprecedented. So this is what Prime Minister Modi has done, or the religious populism of religious Prime Minister Modi has achieved. The second part, which second criteria, is limitation of content. So if you look at the limitation of content, there are 2 issues we are looking at. One is by blocking websites, and the second is by restrictions on social media companies. So in both these areas, again, we see that while these things were happening before 2014, before the arrival of Prime Minister Modi, but what has happened after 2014 is completely of another ball game. So it is completely different from what was happening before. So if you look at the blocking of websites, these internet website blocking are done under Section 69A of IT Act and under 2009 blocking rules. And again, the government doesn't have to tell anyone why they are blocking these websites. So they can block your website without telling you why they are blocking it. So you have to go to the court to ask the government why it has been done. And recently, the blocking of websites have been increased. So in 2016, there were only 633 websites were blocked. In 2017, it increased to 1,385. and then in 2018 it increased to around 3,000, but in 2020 it increased to 10,000 websites. So you look, the pace of blocking the website has been increasing recently in the recent 3-4 years. Coming to the other issue of restricting or forcing or threatening the social media companies or intermediaries so that they will not allow content which is not liked by the Indian government. So because of the power of India, which has the largest number of or second largest number of Facebook users, second one of the biggest collection of internet users. So when Indian government says something to these social media companies, they think twice by not complying, because of the fact that if Indian market, they cannot operate in Indian market, this means that they are losing a large chunk of their profits. So they do give more importance, and they usually have a very cozy relationship with the Indian government. If you look at recent years, Facebook particularly has had a very cozy relationship with the BJP Modi government. They used to hire many people who resigned from the BJP party, and then they joined the Facebook, or their relatives were part of BJP people. So recently the head of the governance of Facebook in India was the sister of a BJP official. So such cozy relationship has been there, but even then Modi government has decided that this situation is not enough, and they have come up with new rules. So in 2020 they have come up with new rules that make it more and more difficult for social media companies to ignore their demands. So under these new rules, they have less time to block websites, to block users, and they have to have officers in charge inside India. And Indian government has threatened these officers to by arresting threatened arrest of these officers if these social media companies don't comply. And these new rules, which are called the Intermediary Guidelines and Digital Media Ethics Code Rules 2021, have made it extremely difficult for social media companies to improve in India unless they toe the line of Modi government or other governments. So, and of course, the Indian government has been making more and more demands to Twitter, Facebook, and other social media companies to block, people, users, or websites. So in February 2021, Modi government asked the Twitter, and Twitter blocked 97% of the accounts facing supporting the farmer protests. So there was this big farmer protest going on, and government was against the Indian government, and the Indian government forced Twitter and Facebook to block these websites. Another thing which Indian government is doing is like following China's footsteps. So what they are trying to do is come up with their own national rivals, so that to these social media companies, so they don't have to go to ask them, they can just stop their operation within India. So for example, there is this new rival of Twitter, Coup, which is an Indian-based company, and the Indian government and the BJP and Modi are promoting this Coup so that people would shift to this. And of course, it's much easier to block, threaten Coup as compared to Twitter. So these are the different things which are Indian government is using to control the social media companies. The third thing is violation of user rights. Again, last few years have been very difficult for people who are you want to give an independent view on social media, on different areas, even on their own websites. That is not liked by the Modi government. So journalists have been threatened, protesters, activists have been threatened, have been jailed. So there is this particularly draconian law, UAPA, under which activists are jailed and they can't get bail. And then the courts don't listen to, the court cases are not, reach the courts, and people are imprisoned for more than a year just on the basis of this UAPA, and they're they don't get the bail. There are many instances during the recent citizenship protests or farmer protests when people were picked up and jailed because of their activity on social media. Lastly, there was this recent scandal of Pegasus, which has happened in many different countries. An Israeli company which was used to secretly surveil people, opposition parties, head of opposition parties, bureaucrats, even army officers were surveilled by the Indian government using this Pegasus software. This spyware was used extensively, and the government was not ready to come up with why they use it and how they use it and how many people they use it against. So this is another way of controlling the digital sphere or cybersphere in India. If you look at the religious role in digital authoritarianism, the first criteria is religious justifications of internet curbs by the government. So India, if you look at Hinduism, it doesn't have, like Abrahamic religions, a book, a prophet, or some specific principles on which to distinguish whether one is Hindu or not Hindu. So there are not many religious justifications of internet curbs in India. Similarly, the prominent role of religious leaders have been there, and there's are increasingly Hindu yogis and Hindu sants have been using pressurizing the BJP government, but this role is also comparatively new as compared to religious leaders in Islamic countries or Muslim majority countries. There are laws related to blasphemy. They are there, but they again they are not used. So if you look at the first three criteria, Indian, as far as India is concerned, there is not much use of that. But the last criteria, more restrictions in areas where religious minorities live in large number, that is one area where India excels. So if you look at Kashmir, for the last 4 or 5 years, most of the internet shutdowns are there. The longest shutdown happened from August 2019 to almost a year of September 2020, when for a whole year, for the first 6 months, everything was blocked. And in the last 6 months, there were only 2G or 3G internet was available. So this is the situation in India. I'm willing to answer the questions after. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Salim, for that report on India. So now we turn to Mr. Ismail, who's going to give us an overview of the Indonesia section of the report.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity to present today. So before starting, I think it is necessary to remember that Indonesia experienced a sudden transition to democracy upon the collapse of the New Order regime. Though democracy still prevails in the country, freedom in Indonesia has been in a steady state of decline, as highlighted by its 2017 to 2021 scores by Freedom House. Now, this decline has been argued to be due to President Joko Widodo deliberately sidelining democracy in an attempt to build a modern economy. A modern economy is believed to serve as a strong foundation for democracy in the future. Unfortunate consequences include the government's reduced tolerance for criticism and the prevalence of discriminatory regulations against minorities. Combined, both elements have led to increased abuse of religious freedom. Interestingly, there have been suggestions that Indonesia's level of discrimination against religious minorities remain unchanged since 1998. There are also signs of increasing religiosity, such as the increasing prevalence of Muslim-only residential compounds. Now, given the shrinking public space, minorities have resorted to going online. Social movements such as those supporting LGBTQ or women's rights have sought refuge on blogs, websites, chat rooms, and social networking platforms. Similarly, social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and WhatsApp enable communities of like-minded individuals to interact in both private and public group settings. Though the virtual world may provide sanctuaries for these communities, there are still limitations as the internet is censored, regulated, and controlled by the Indonesian government. Though Indonesia's internet governance laws have been described to be well-intended, censorship regulations have created controversies. So following the framework used for the report, I highlighted these controversies in three categories. The first would be obstacles to access, second is limits on content, and the third is violation of users' rights. So on obstacles to access, internet shutdowns are still being utilized, generally as a means to manage riots. In the last 3 years, internet shutdowns were used to manage two types of riots. The first is the protest against the 2019 presidential results, and second, riots in Papua. The span of internet shutdown ranged from hours to possibly a few weeks. Noteworthily, the internet shutdowns in Papua and West Papua in 2019 were deemed to have violated the law by the Jakarta State Administrative Court. However, late last year, the Constitutional Court overruled this decision. Now, with regards to placing limits on content, banning of websites that are deemed inappropriate still continues. Sites that are deemed inappropriate include those that seem to promote religious extremism, pornography, internet or entertainment streaming websites, and websites promoting content piracy. In 2018 alone, there were nearly 3,000 websites deemed to be disseminating extremist ideologies that were blocked, and about 9,500 other websites were being reviewed. Recently, based on Google's report, Indonesia submitted the largest amount of requests from January to June 2021 on all of its platforms, including YouTube and Google Search. Due to the continued banning of websites, Indonesians have become au fait with countermeasures such as the use of VPNs. In 2019, Indonesia was found to have the most extensive VPN usage in the world. Additionally, Indonesia recently passed an internet bill that mandates online service providers to remove or block content on their platform when requested by the government. According to the government, Ministerial Regulation 5/2020 is essential to address disinformation and the destabilizing effects of fake news. But this regulation enables the government to exert its control over multinational companies such as Facebook, YouTube, and Netflix. This is exerted in the form of these companies being at risk of losing their licenses to run their services in Indonesia. In abiding to this regulation, these companies are also required to ensure that their platforms do not contain or facilitate distribution of prohibited content. Unfortunately, as with other censorship laws, defining what is prohibited is problematic due to its broad definition. Lastly, on violations of user rights, one of Indonesia's cyber laws that is highlighted is the Law on Information and Electronic Transactions, also known as UUITE. This law, which severely threatens civil liberties, has been used more frequently by Jokowi's administration than other previous administrations in response to growing polarization on social media and to counter accusations against it, such as corruption and misconduct. It was reported that since 2016 to 2020, more than 300 criminal cases have been brought under UUITE. The key issue with UUITE is its broad definitions. Though it is to safeguard the populace against immorality through its criminalization, what is deemed as immoral is not clearly defined, leaving it open to manipulation. Similarly, the term transmission in this law is open to interpretation, thus enabling even private consensual sharing of immoral contents can be considered as an offense. Not only has the government leveraged on UUITE, the police, government officials, and businessmen are the three biggest clusters to have used this law. Now, and with that, I actually will pass back the session back to the moderator. So thank you very much once again.
Thank you very much, Sham, for that coverage of the Indonesia section of the report. Now I'll call on Kainat to present on the Pakistan country case in the report. Thanks, Kainat.
Okay, thank you, Simon. So to understand the findings in the report, it's important to see the context in which Pakistan exists and has existed for the past 70 years. It was formed in 1947 as a result of the partition of India. And since its beginning, it has been somewhat a fragile democracy, which has meant that there was a huge gap of leadership and governance in the country since its very beginning. This facilitated 4 military dictatorships in the country, and most of the democratically elected governments never completed their 5-year tenure in government. So the idea of expressing your rights freely in public and online has always been in jeopardy in Pakistan. But in recent years, we have seen that there's been an increased escalation in this pattern of surveillance of citizens using blogs or online space to discuss state-related things, and social media has come under a lot of pressure too. To understand why this is now becoming a problem, we need to also understand what sort of a party is ruling Pakistan right now. So the party in power in Pakistan right now came into office in 2018. It's a classic case of a populist party that merges themes of anti-corruption, anti-elitism, and variations of Islamist, populist religious notions to garner support of the populace. The unique thing about the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, or the PTI, is that it is not a dynastic political party, which means that in Pakistan, most of the political parties are sort of continuation of the same family coming into power for the last 70 years. So PTI was has been in power since 2018, and it gave a lot of hope to people for a democratic turn in Pakistan. But what really happened in the last 3 years is that PTI has been unable to fulfill a lot of its promises, and increasingly it has to rely on a lot of authoritative and populist antics to sort of maintain its time in office. And it's no secret that it's quite close. It has quite a close relationship with the military establishment, which has always had a fair share of involvement in Pakistani politics. So together, PTI and the military have been extensively promoting this idea of 5th generation warfare. The idea of 5th generation warfare is sort of a exaggerated fear, crisis, and threat that argues that the Pakistani culture and the faith of Islam and the national security of the country are under threat from traditional rivals such as India, or even allegedly a Zionist lobby or the Western influence. And this also sort of justifies what sort of curbs they put on, in terms of not only the public sphere in person, but also digital and cyberspace. So when we looked at we looked at three main areas: the blackouts that happen in Pakistan in the cyberspace, the limiting of content and violation of users' rights. These are not new, and PTI and Imran Khan are not the first one to sort of introduce them. So Pakistan was heavily invested in the war or terror that the West was sort of carrying out in Afghanistan, being a very close neighbor. And what really happened during this phase was that a massive investment was made in surveillance in Pakistan. And this massive surveillance sort of has been scaled up and justified over the years. So the blackout started to curb terrorism because there was a point in Pakistan where, unfortunately, suicide bombing became a norm. And in big cities across the country, it was happening on a weekly basis. So what the government started doing was, and they still do this, that if it's a religious festival or an event or a gathering, they shut down internet in that very specific region or that city. But now, increasingly in the past 3 years, this has transcended to other areas. So Pakistan has quite a turbulent relationship with some of its provinces, because Pakistan is a federation. So these provinces or states, two of them in particular, and some federal, at some administrative areas, this at times have groups called separatist groups who want independence or are fighting for their rights. So in places like Balochistan or Fatah, internet blackouts are constantly used to sort of curb freedoms of individuals to express their right, or sort of highlight the activity of the Pakistan military that hurts civilians at times in these cases. And these blackouts are now also being used in major provinces like Punjab, where, you know, opposition political parties are gathering. So recently, last year, the report found that there was a massive protest by a right-wing party called Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan, and that was also blacked out by the government with by shutting down the internet and cellular network coverage in that area where the protest was passing through. And they also sort of blocked internet facilities and access in areas where conferences are taking place that are discussing anti-state or anti-military sort of narratives. So this is what is happening in terms of blackouts. The second area is limiting the content. So Pakistan has a body which is called the PTA, the Pakistan Telecommunication Authority. It looks after not only the internet, but television and all other broadcasting services in the country. We found that it uses the very sentimental and arbitrary definitions of Islam, morality, family values, and the idea that something is anti-state, and it has a very extensive history of banning YouTube, platforms like Twitter, TikTok, WhatsApp, Facebook. They've all faced bans at different instances in Pakistan for either being too anti-state or promoting what PTA calls immorality. So basically, it's a state apparatus that is being abused by whichever government is in power to sort of, you know, morally police or sort of eliminate freedom of speech or thought or ideas or discourse in the country. And lastly comes in the violation of use of rights. Surveillance of citizens is quite commonly done in Pakistan, and usually bloggers, student protesters, religious minorities, activists such as women rights activists face a lot of harassment. So this harassment usually also is legitimized. First, it was the war on terror that was used as an excuse, and now fifth generation warfare is like a very common excuse used by used to surveil citizens. And what this really does is that it leads to monitoring of content, and which can lead to people into jails and in courtrooms under the cyber crime laws, because the cyber crime laws are quite vague in their nature. So this really, you know, helps the state control as to what sort of information or discussions are going on online. And if they see a narrative that they feel is what they feel is threatening, it becomes highly problematic. And in the last 3-4 years, this has become more problematic, because now Pakistan has the right of a new law, which is called removal and blocking of unlawful online content. It was introduced in 2020. And this also strings to the last point here in the case study of Pakistan, that a lot of this leads to blasphemy accusations. So if somebody says something religiously sensitive online, and if the person comes on the radar of the state, since these surveillance regulations and all of these laws and legal frameworks are out there, even the slightest hint of accusations can mean a whole lifetime behind bars or a pending trial. So it's quite serious. So overall, what we find through this report in the case of Pakistan is that the country has always had trouble with expression of allowing its citizens the right to express their grievances or their ideas or have a discourse. But this is now intensifying, and with a populist government in power and the military establishment sort of, in cahoots with this, it's becoming quite problematic, and cyberspace is no longer a safe space where people can sort of express their ideas or, disagree with the government. So over to Simon.
Thank you so much, Kainat. And now we'll turn to Dr. Shukri, who's going to give us a review of the Malaysia section of the report.
Right, thank you, Simon. So firstly, if I may, I'll start with similar to what the rest have done, which is talk about the democratic nature of Malaysia in the first place, and relating to what Mahmoud discussed earlier on this transition towards democracy. So for decades, Malaysia has been considered a hybrid regime, more or less electoral authoritarianism. But what happened in 2018 was we had the first change in government through elections. So people were talking about Malaysia transitioning into a mature democracy. Unfortunately, this experiment only lasted about 22 months before that government fell. And I have argued elsewhere that I call this, borrowing a term from someone else, democratic careening, right? Malaysia is not really transitioning towards democracy, but it's not really going back to authoritarianism. It's just trying to find its balance. So how do I relate this to Islamist populism? Is that the fall of the elected Pakatan Harapan government was partly due to Islamist populists. Mostly they are Malay Muslim leaders. Some they used to rule the government for 60 years, and some used to be part of the opposition, but they've used Islam as part of their political strategy. So this is where Islamist populism came about in Malaysia. When we talk about digital authoritarianism, here in Malaysia's case, I can safely say that cyberspace was relatively free for about a decade or so. And that's where the opposition members and parties use it to their advantage to win over support, through blogs and whatnot. I'm talking about in the 90s, early 2000s. And because of this, they were able to win significant support in the 2008 election, 2013 election. And this is when the Barisan National Government, the one that has ruled since independence, they started to figure out that they have to enter cyberspace. They can't leave it to the opposition, because the blogs back in the early 2000s used to be very popular, a way for the opposition to reach out to the masses. So it was around this time, 2010s, 2013, that the government really seriously used especially big data analysis to their advantage, right? Especially in Facebook, especially in WhatsApp. So these are the two main intermediaries that the government used. So why did I say that Malaysia's cyberspace was relatively free? Also, because back in the 90s, specifically in 1995, Mahathir Mohamad, who was the prime minister back then during his first term, he actually made a statement that the government would not censor the internet, right? Interestingly, about 20 years later, in 2014, when he was in semi-retirement, suddenly he changed his tune, and he said that we have to limit content on the internet. And he used the justification that the rest of my colleagues have mentioned, for public security, for morality. So it's interesting, right? How he went from no censorship on the internet to now we need to for public security. But again, here there's the question that my other colleagues have posed. What do they mean when they say public security, right? So the opposition have of course decried this and said that this is just a way for the government to justify censorship on the opposition and whatnot. But also what they meant when they say public security and also morality, they're talking about the 3R in Malaysia, which are the royalty, race, and religion. So the royal family is obviously tied to the identity of the Malay Muslims, who are obviously the majority in the country. And when they say, race and religion, meaning that you can't, hate speech against race and religion, they're really talking about Malays and Islam. So this is the public security that they want to protect. So that's the religious populism part in Malaysia. So now I'm going to go to the three concepts that we discussed in the report. In terms of obstacle to access, like I've argued in the report, I think that Malaysia is relatively better than the other countries because the government has never shut down the internet as far as I know. The closest thing that happened was back in 2012 when there was a political rally organized by an organization called Bersih that was calling for clean and fair election in the country. There was slowdown in the internet. So some accused the government of doing something about it, but the government just said that it's just a lot of internet users at the time. So that's the closest thing. Besides that, there's no real internet shutdown, either nationwide or regionally. Unfortunately, however, in some places, especially rural areas, internet access is still bad in Malaysia. So this is a kind of obstacle to access, right? Okay, so limitation of content. We have what is called the MCMC, the Malaysian Communication and Multimedia Commission. So this is the body that's responsible to regulate, basically contents online. So what happened is if someone made a complaint, then they would have to ask the intermediaries to take down the post and whatnot. Most of the sites in Malaysia that are banned related to pornographic sites, gambling, terrorist-linked websites. So that's that. But interestingly also, back in 2018, the year that the Pakatan Harapan won the election, I'm sorry, 3 websites were blocked during the night of the election. They don't want the results to come out. Again, the justification that was used for national security, for stability. They don't want the results that the present national government has fallen to come out as soon as possible. And also relating to report towards Facebook and Twitter, of course, this also happened. But what I found interesting is that there's an exponential increase in 2020. Cases of reports to Facebook and Twitter by the government. And this coincided, of course, with the fall of the Pakatan Harapan government. So we had a brand new government back then called the Perikatan Nasional, which was very loose, I might say even weak. It was weak because it fell again a year later. So they used this to their advantage to limit content online. And also they used the COVID-19 pandemic also as a reason, as an excuse. They were stopping people from, especially civil servants, from criticizing the government's handling of the pandemic. So these are some of the ways. And I also want to add that this is something that's ongoing, obviously, right? 2 days ago, a very well-known political analyst in Malaysia, James Chin, he shared that the MCMC reported one of his tweets whereby he condemned Taliban sympathizers in Malaysia. But that tweet was shared back in September of last year. But the MCMC just reported that tweet recently, in this week, I assume. So this is interesting. We see that it's a big question mark. Why is it happening now? James Chin, of course, felt that this is kind of harassment towards him. So yeah, this is something that's ongoing. And the last point is on the violation of users' right. And for me, this is where we see digital authoritarianism, I might say, in Malaysia, because harassment online and also offline towards those who are very active online. So in the case study that I mentioned in the report, I mentioned two names, Fahmi Reza, who is a very again well-known satirical artist, I might say, right? His works always get the government's attention. He's been called by the police at least 9 times for his satirical artworks. Recently, last week, if I'm not mistaken, last week, he was called again by the police for sharing his artwork on the royalty. So remember the 3R, one of it is the royalty. So because of that, he was called. And again, remember when we talk about royalty, we're talking about the Malay Muslim community. So he was called for that. And another prominent case in recent years is Ain Husniza. She's a 17-year-old student. She shared on TikTok that a teacher, specifically a religious male teacher, shared a rape joke online. But she, because of her TikTok, she was called by the police to give a statement again, because it was claimed that, you know, in the name of public security, she was called to give a statement on that. Another case that I think I want to mention is on Malaysia Kini, a very well-known news portal in Malaysia. They were found by the court to be liable of contempt, and they were asked to pay 200,000 damages, which is much more than what prosecutor was asked for. But the thing is, they were brought to court for comments that users made on the platform. So it was nothing to do with the writers or the editors themselves, but users were writing something on in the comment section. And for that, they were brought to court. We also have the Department of Community Communication, JCOM in Malay, the abbreviation. This department has been accused by the opposition to spread propaganda for the government. And back in 2020, they were given a large budget of 40 million ringgit to partly to fund cyber troopers, to talk up the government, and to, of course, criticize the opposition. So that's what was used by the government. And finally, if I may, on violation of users' right, just like the other cases, Twitter especially has been used for citizens to organize rallies and demonstrations. So in the past year, we had 2 rallies, hashtag Lawan, or in English fight, and another one is hashtag Tangkap Azambaki, which is about 2 weeks ago, against a senior civil servant on corruption. So they plan it, they organize it on Twitter, online and whatnot. And again, the police called them in to give their statement. This is, of course, a sort of harassment on these online users, right? When peaceful assembly is actually fully legal in Malaysia. So finally, in conclusion, I just want to say that in Malaysia, what happened is that a lot of people just self-censor themselves. In terms of religious leaders' role, they don't really say much, but they do use the term fitnah, which means slander. Fitnah is kind of a religious term. Usually it's used in religious context, but then religious figures, and especially the Malay Muslim establishment, has used it to term fake news as slander. And sometimes it can, you know, become a legal problem, and they use the Sedition Act against hate speech, especially against the 3R, religion, race, and royalty. I know I didn't put it in the report, but I just remembered something. Last year, in the middle of last year, I mean, I can't talk about religious populism unless I talk about Hadi Awang, which is a very well-known Islamist politician in Malaysia. He's a firebrand. So in the middle of last year, he posted on his social media accounts talking about how the opposition party used social media to win the election in 2018, and also to support LGBT issues and going against Islamic values, etc., etc. For me, I find it interesting that he's using all of this religious populist rhetoric against social media, but he posted it on his social media accounts. So this is the interesting things that are going on in Malaysia. So thank you. Back to you, Simon.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shukri. Now, our final country case for the report is Turkey, and I'll pass over to Ihsan now to discuss the Turkey case in the report.
Thank you. Turkey is the textbook case of religious populism, authoritarianism, and digital authoritarianism. And in all these 4 country cases, we discussed many issues, many problems, and how religious populism emerges and how it's been manipulated, etc., and how authoritarian governments or authoritarian forces in society attack freedoms in relation to digital space, cyberspace. All these things, without exaggeration, happen in Turkey. So Turkey is a culmination or combination of all these cases. Without any exception, whatever you see in these 4 countries, it happens in Turkey. Of course, different from the Indian case, in the Turkish case, it's the Muslims or Islamists in power, and the religious minorities are either Alevis or different non-Muslim religious groups or LGBT communities, etc. But whatever happens in these countries, it has happened in Turkey, unfortunately. And till 2010, Turkey was more or less a democratic country. The ruling party, the Justice and Development Party, AKP, was a pro-democratizing force. It was also populist at the time, and it had this victimhood identity, but this was in the domestic context. So these Islamists or former Islamists, they said that they've been victimized by the secularist, Kemalist, pro-Western or pro-Westernization previous rulers of Turkey, especially the military, but also the people who had cultural power, people who dominated the media, movie industry, and other areas of life. But with the Gezi protest in 2013, there was a tremendous change. And for the first time, maybe openly, Tayyip Erdogan, the current president, attacked Western powers. Until that time, Turkey or the AKP needed these Western powers and EU accession process, democratization rhetoric, etc., against the tutelage regime in Turkey, against the Kemalist establishment, against the Kemalist hegemony, for justification, for democratization, because Islamists needed this democratization. Why? Because in the past, every 10 years, there was a military coup, and the Kemalists banned and simply shut down Islamist political parties, like the socialist and pro-Alevi or Kurdish political parties, because the constitutional court was in the hands of the Kemalists, etc. So the AKP needed this pro-democratization, pro-Western forces, European Union support, etc. But after it consolidated its power, after its third general electoral victory in 2011, after it changed the constitution that simply eliminated the political power of military, etc., then the AKP felt that it doesn't need the pro-Western rhetoric anymore. And with the Gezi protest, maybe there was a genuine fear that something similar to colorful revolutions in the other parts of the world was happening in Turkey. And also Morsi, the Islamist president in Egypt, was toppled, and Erdogan feared that something similar was happening in Turkey. So he also thought that the West was behind this. We don't know if he was genuine in this or not, but he simply changed his rhetoric of victimhood and he expanded it to cover Western powers as well. So in this case, the secularists in Turkey that victimized the Muslims in the country for decades simply were presented as the puppets of the West. So he called this the mastermind. So the mastermind that included Jewish lobby, United States, CIA, etc. This sort of composite character here, the villain. So it's composed of the Jewish lobby, the CIA, United States, Germany, etc. And they were jealous of Turkey, jealous of Erdogan. Why? Because Erdogan was the leader of the Muslim world, Ummah. Turkey was very powerful, or it was becoming very powerful. It was leading the Ummah against the oppression, and then this colonization, etc. So he simply framed the issue between different civilizations. Initially, Erdogan was pro-alliance of civilizations and he was pro-dialogue, etc. But now he turned the tables and he said that Turkey has been attacked. Erdogan has been criticized. Why? Because these puppets who poured into the streets, to the Gezi Square, etc. Why? Because they were manipulated by anti-Islamic powers, these Islamophobic powers, Jews, Zionists, etc. So this was the start. But another thing that Erdogan realized, that they was very powerless in the cyberspace. He gradually over the years, from 2002, when he came to power, until 2011-12, he gradually simply captured all media institutions, almost all media institutions, TV stations, newspapers, etc. But these were all conventional media, and he did not realize that the opposition, the seculars, pro-Western powers, and others who could not find any voice, any space in the conventional media, they simply migrated to cyberspace. And similar to what happened in the Tahrir Square and in other parts of the world, people mobilized and coordinated through social media, and they poured into these millions during the Gezi protests, and it was for weeks, and Erdogan didn't know what to do. So after that time, he changed the laws. He gave immense powers to Turkish National Intelligence Agency, MIT, in 2014, so that MIT could simply do whatever it wanted, similar to any other authoritarian country, surveillance and just penetrating the private spheres, capturing even hacking their social media accounts, and everything you can imagine. And also Turkish intelligence, Turkish communications agency were also given immense powers. And additionally, Erdogan and municipal governments under the control of the pro-government, the ruling party, they started supporting and funding trolls, and tens and thousands of them, so that the pro-government forces could balance the opposition forces in the cyberspace. And religious populism served Erdogan very well in this case. So as I said, he put this in the context of civilizational rivalry, civilizational war, a sort of Huntingtonian clash between pro-Islamic forces led by Turkey and the Crusaders, helped by the Zionists. And in this endeavor, as a sort of religious person and a graduate of Imam Hatip schools, Erdogan was the leading figure who also formulated this religious rhetoric. He said, for instance, Twitter is a social menace, it's immoral, it's attack against the moral fabric of Turkish society, etc. But he has been helped also by religious figures. And in the Turkish case, unlike the other case, the state has a religious body, even though it's been constitutional secular. The Kemalist established Turkish Directorate of Religious Affairs to control religion, so that religion couldn't be a civilian resistance power, or it couldn't be used by the reactionary forces, etc. So for decades, all mosques in Turkey have been controlled by the Directorate of Religious Affairs, meaning the state. All imams in Turkey and religious functionaries, preachers, etc., have been the employees of the state, and it is illegal to open or have a mosque, or a civilian mosque. It is illegal to be a civilian imam. There is no such a concept. There is, I mean, even the phrase when I use it, civilian imam, it is awkward. There is no such a thing. It's illegal. So the state has been controlling religion, or has been trying to control religion so that it obeys the state, the rulers, etc. So Erdogan simply hijacked, because he's been in power for 2 decades. He also used Turkey's religious directorate. And when you look at the Friday sermons, and about 60% of Turkish males go to Friday prayers, and there is this section about 15 minutes that the imam reads a text. And normally it is about worship, virtue, ethical issues, etc. But it's been politicized a lot. It's been an Islamist, even radical rhetoric has penetrated into these texts, and all these texts are written in the Diyanet headquarters in Ankara, and imams have to read them verbatim, so they cannot simply preach whatever they want. And regularly, Diyanet keeps talking about social media as a menace, and also gossiping about the government, criticizing the rulers. It's against Islam, it is not good, and in the hereafter you'll be punished, etc. So Erdogan has been using Diyanet, and with this religious populist rhetoric, this civilizationist rhetoric, that Turkey has been under attack. It is like the independence war times. This is happening again. These great powers, they are jealous of Turkey, etc. And social media has been used by these powers and their puppets in Turkey. So Turkey has been using this. And another aspect of this religious populism in relation to digital authoritarianism is that also many religious scholars, civilian or so-called civilian scholars, have been using this rhetoric as well. So you would see that in their columns in the newspapers, when they talk about religious issues, they attack social media, etc. And also what they've been doing is that, similar to the other country cases here, they've been justifying government bans and attacks against the freedoms in social media and cyberspace. So they come up with a religious formula in every case. They just justify it by saying that, look at Quran and Sunnah, and this is why it's happening, etc. When it comes to, of course, pornography, LGBT, etc., it is easier for them to make their case. But also they've been applying this to Kurdish minorities, Gülen movement, for instance, and by simply framing them as terrorists and saying that, look, they attack Turkey and the president. Why? Because they are siding with the crusaders. They want to divide Turkey so that they can be colonized, etc. So they've been using this securitizing rhetoric, but helped by religious populism, etc. And I won't go into details because I talk a lot, and but we can see that in the report you'll see details in relation to numbers, but about 80% of Turkish society has access to internet. This is a huge number if you exclude the kids. And about each user in Turkey spends 8 hours, about 8 hours, 7 hours and 57 minutes on internet every day, 8 hours. So this is a huge number as well. And thousands of websites have been blocked. For instance, in October, 113,000 websites were blocked. And in 2020, 450,000 domains, 140 URLs, and 42,000 tweets have been banned. And many accounts were banned, or if they cannot ban it because they are the accounts of people who are abroad, like Bülent's account, for instance, people in Turkey cannot access it. So the government controls this as well. And also these platforms such as Netflix and others, the government controls them and they just ask them to remove the content because they don't like it, etc. And Facebook, Twitter, they have these annual reports and they keep reporting that Turkey is either the first or the second country that demanded the bans or censorship and blocking the content, etc. Even though population-wise it is not one of the populist countries, but demands from the Turkish government simply suppresses all other countries in most cases. So all these things happening in Turkey, and let me repeat, Turkey is just a textbook case of religious populism and digital authoritarianism. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Yilmaz. Okay, so that completes the main set of presentations in our panel discussion today. And we have about half an hour now to open it up to the floor and to everyone present for questions, which is terrific. Before I do that, though, Professor Yilmaz has very helpfully provided a copy of the report for those who haven't yet been to the site to read it. So if you open your chat function, you can actually see, for those of you who are interested, there's a copy of the report in PDF that you can now directly download. So thank you very much for doing that, Isam. The way this should work now, I think, the best way to proceed, everybody has at the bottom of their screen a reactions tab or a reactions button. If you click on that reactions button on Zoom, you'll see raise hand. And if you do have questions, we can then work through everyone who's raised a hand to ask a question, and we'll be able to work that way. So if someone does have a question for any of our panelists, please feel free to raise your Zoom hand, and we can start that way. Any questions? All right, it looks like Aziza has a question. So go ahead, Aziza, if you want to unmute and direct your question to one of our panelists.
Hello, this is Azize. First, I would like to thank the authors of this very insightful report on religious populism and digital authoritarianism in Asia. My question is for Dr. Mahmut Pargu. Dr. Pargu, you pointed at a very important illusion about authoritarian leaders and their populist policies. You said people think they are temporary, but this is not the case. They are there, actually. And they are adapting themselves to new situations and manage to survive in different contexts. And it's apparent that this also applies to their restrictive policies in digital world. I wonder how this illusion can persist for such a long time. We know that for some countries, it persists for decades. Also, do you think this illusionary perception is limited to the peoples of these countries, or it is also the perception of states from the democratic world? Thank you.
Yes, Simon, can I answer?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aziz. Interesting question. Actually, you know, this new concept of electoral authoritarianism, or right now we are bringing it to this sphere of cyberspace as a digital authoritarianism, smart authoritarianism, as I like to call it. This is like always, you know, for the state or for the authoritarian or the despot, always be one step ahead of the population, of the opposition. So it's, you know, traditionally, like you go to Saddam Hussein right now, you know, Assad, or probably before of Gaddafi, these kind of dictatorships is too tough. You know, it's all about brutal force. But right now, people are learning. So, okay, like you go to Iran, you know, the kind of debates you have in public sphere, the kind of freedoms you have, even, you know, in some kind of public sphere, in social media, in taxis, say whatever you like, you know, it's really staggering, you know. Compare it to Australia. In Australia, nobody talks about anything. It's not a politicized, you know, political nation. It's everybody about just normal, you know, daily things, economy. But in Iran, everybody talks about economy, and people are critical, and they talk in social media everywhere. But right now, you know, the government has learned that, look, it doesn't matter. Let them, they say whatever they want, you know, okay, that's all right. They know how to mitigate the risk, you know, because the whole idea is to use the advantages of, you know, the perception of democracy, but at the same time has a tight control. And also there are other things. The more undemocratic, closed system you are, you have more information opacity. And so you don't know what's going on. So you are more at risk. So the whole idea is that. So is it going to continue? You know, we social scientists, political scientists, we always, you know, like to say, okay, we know what will happen. We know the justifications of what has happened. But basically, you know, we don't know, and nobody knows. Maybe in the future, some new technologies will come and something happen, and also case by case different. But it looks like this is a kind of, you know, ongoing pattern that just try to be one step ahead of the opposition. Don't try to smash everything. Don't try to have control of everything in this state. Try to be ahead. Keep that, you know, say pretension or facade of democracy, the institutions. Let get the legitimacy internationally, domestically, but also you have control, real control.
Thank you, Mahmoud. Bulent has also reminded me, everyone, you're also more than welcome, if you feel more comfortable that way, to type questions into the chat box, and we can cycle through the questions that way. I don't see any other hands up, so I'm going to be a bit cheeky and ask a question myself. Mahmoud, you touched on at the beginning of your comments about the emerging role of AI in the Chinese ability to control the internet. I'm wondering, I know it didn't appear so much in the report, but I'm wondering if you have any sense at which the country cases that we've discussed in the report are adopting AI, or perhaps even in cooperation or collaboration with Chinese companies and developers around the spread of AI in blocks and checks on the internet in our country cases at all?
Look, there are, you know, actually Chinese export of AI surveillance, you know, technologies are really documented very well. There is one report, I don't know, I don't remember if we have mentioned it here or not. It's called AI Global Surveillance Index, AIGS. And in this index, it shows that 75 out of 176 countries have actively used AI technologies for surveillance. 36 of these countries have imported Chinese surveillance tech. So it's from Huawei, Hikvision, ZTE, and other, companies. But interestingly, or probably, ironically, it's not just China. So if your friend, if you're like in Saudi Arabia is very good internet, very interesting example that it has both many surveillance technologies from China, but its cloud, computing capabilities comes from Google and Alibaba. Some of their, networking applications come from NEC, and so there are other countries also providing the. But the issue with China is that when it comes to very, very advanced technologies, there are just 2 countries in the world. Like, let's talk about advanced image recognition, advanced, all advanced AI all applications are either in China or in the US, and that's all because the amount of data they have. So you have heard that say China is the Saudi Arabia of the data. So it means that the more data you have, the more power and the more processing power, or have to optimize your algorithm. And this data is either in the hand of big tech companies in China or in the US. In the case of US, you may have some control over exporting these very sensitive technologies to other countries, especially if they are authoritarian regimes. In some of them, they don't. They don't implement those kind of restrictions. But I guess if it goes to really advanced technologies of surveillance, there should be some restriction. But in the case of China, China is happy to do that and already is doing it. So it's very dangerous actually. And as far as I know, many smart censorship applications are right now being exported by China to these countries and regimes. So yeah, China is really very scary actor in the future of AI and digital authoritarianism.
Thank you. That sounds really dystopian. I've also popped a link from one of the Carnegie endowment reports on the index that Mahmoud mentioned, if people are interested in looking further into that. We have a question from Bulent to Ali Salim. How could the big technology companies facilitate the dirty job performed by authoritarian regimes, and which instruments can the Democrats and freedom lovers use to persuade companies to not to do what they're doing right now? That's for you, Dr. Salim. I think you're on mute. Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Perfect.
So, social media companies or intermediary companies are in a much powerful position if they are dealing with countries which have small number of subscribers. So there they can, of course, stand tall and say we are not going to restrict internet or certain users or certain websites, so or whatever, or not take down comments of certain users or organizations. The problem comes, so Pakistan, government of Pakistan requests Twitter and Facebook regularly. So there are reports of Twitter. You can go in Twitter website and see which countries are asking most requests for blocking a website or taking down comments. So you will see that it's if you look at Pakistan, only 20 to 30% requests are accepted. If you look to other countries, for example, Turkey or India, much higher number of requests are accepted. It's not that what government of Pakistan is saying is, particularly, bad or particularly wrong or unlawful as compared to India or Turkey. It's the power these countries have because of their number of subscribers, because of the market share they have. So it's very easy, and they are doing a good job as far as smaller countries are concerned. The issue comes when they deal with, for example, India, where if you don't operate in India, this means 50% of your business is out. So there the tricky part comes, and I think they are trying to stand up, but because they are businesses, it's a capitalist market. I don't think they will be, rejecting most of the Indian government requests. And then there is another threat which is coming on, as I explained. And this is what, if you look at the last question, the Indian government is following China. So like China, they are coming up with social media companies that are based in their own countries, or in the languages, local languages. So in that case, they can easily control them. They can easily shut them down without much repercussions at the international scene, without, avoiding any criticism from, for example, US or UN or other organizations. So now the social media companies are in a difficult position. So if they reject requests of, for example, Indian government, one, their business is restricted. Second, their rival is supported by the Indian government. So yes, I hope Twitter and Facebook and other companies can stand up. But as we see in case of China, when businesses, for them, the most important thing is profits and market share. So I have not much faith in Twitter standing up to Indian government or Chinese government. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have another question from the audience that's come through the chat. Thank you for impressive analysis in depth and width. I'm curious about if the researchers plan to continue working on developing a follow-up report focusing on AI and social media. I also have this question. The questioner mentions that she'd be grateful for any insight any of the authors have on how we might reverse digital political manipulation, and any comments on how these countries influence one another, and if we can define it as a network of authoritarianism between these 5 country cases, which is indeed a very interesting question. Any one of our esteemed panel wish to pick this up?
For the second question, there is already a concept, term for this. It's called authoritarian diffusion. So similar to democratic diffusion. So authoritarians, of course, learn from each other. They simply copy from each other. They don't just import technologies. We know that Iranian government, Turkish governments, etc., they've been buying technologies from the authoritarian governments, but in some cases from other governments that are not authoritarian, like Israel, at least as far as its non-Muslim citizens are concerned. So they've been doing this for ages anyway, and when it comes to digital technologies and digital authoritarianism, they've been already doing this as well. So it's authoritarian diffusion. Yeah. For the first part, I don't know, it would be great, but I don't know if you can achieve it or not.
So yes.
Ali, yeah.
Yes. So I don't know about, I think, yes, as Ihsan has said, there is authoritarian diffusion. And one curious case was, if we look at 3 different countries, so Pakistan, India, and Turkey, they all came up with restricting social media companies, restricting intermediaries, similar type of restrictions in the last one and a half year. So this shows, this is, anecdotal evidence. I don't know whether they looked at each other or not, but these three laws came up in the last 1.5 years. And all these, they are similar, that they restrict, they try to browbeat and intimidate, threaten social media companies to follow the government line. So yes, they do learn. I think they do learn from each other, and they do study each other, how each other is performing, and how, if one state is successful, how they can also do that. And of course, if you look at Israel and China, why they are ahead of other countries in terms of digital manipulation, is that they have populations. In case of China, the whole of China. In case of Israel, the West Bank and Gaza Strip, they have been doing, they have this whole population where they have been trying these new technologies, and how to manipulate, and how to use different ways to manipulate digital media and to increase digital authoritarianism. And when they use that, of course, they can export it, and others can learn from that. So I think what the question is, I agree that they do learn from each other, and they, of course, the technologies, if a technology is developed, for example, China or Israel or Turkey or Pakistan or India, it soon, it will be bought by other companies. Like, for example, Pegasus was bought by all 20+ countries from Israel. So like, these technologies are very quickly become popular and used by different countries. Thank you.
And also, in some cases, companies that produce these either apps or technologies, techniques, methods, etc., they market it everywhere, and they know where to go for these products. So they would, of course, knock on the door of authoritarian powers, saying that, look, China is doing it, we sold it to them, or Turkey is doing it, look how successful they are, why don't you buy it? So this is our portfolio, these are our current customers. So they've been selling it, and like Pegasus did. So even if we assume that they don't learn from each other, there are walls between these countries, these companies would do this service, and they would just go to each single one of them, and they will teach them how to do these things. And unfortunately, in some cases, these countries are based in democratic societies.
Yes, we have another question. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for the interesting presentations, very informative presentations. I was familiar with some of the facts presented here, but some of them are new to me as well. For example, I got to learn that there's authoritarian or populist regime in Indonesia as well. That's kind of new to me. What I heard about Indonesia was they plan to shift their capital city from Jakarta to something new. And I think it's shared by autocrat regimes. Egypt is doing something similar. They are moving. Kazakhstan has done something similar some years ago. So that's kind of interesting. I mean, from an urbanism perspective, that seems to make sense to me, but I guess that's a characteristic shared by authoritarian regimes, shifting the capitals, even in Turkey, in the time of Atatürk. It was chosen, Ankara was chosen as a capital. But my question is to Professor İhsan Yılmaz. You gave some numbers about the number of blocked websites. Just in November, hundreds of thousands of websites. And it sounds too big. I mean, maybe it's not just opposition or people, democracy lovers, so to speak. Maybe it's just the explicit content websites, like pornographic websites. That's my guess, but I don't know. Maybe you can clarify on that. That's a kind of small thing. And you said that Turkey is a combination of all these 4 countries in terms of populism and all those bad things. But isn't that a bit exaggeration? For example, in India, they regularly lynch Muslim minority. They beat up to death some people. But we don't see things like that in Turkey. So isn't that a bit exaggeration, that comment? These are my minor questions, and another bigger question maybe to Professor Yilmaz and maybe to Raja Salim. Some people argue that with the advance of technology, some countries have forever lost their chance to become a democracy, for example, China, because now the governments, the Communist Party is able to control almost everything. So the technology actually favors these authoritarian regimes. Do you agree with this argument, or this technology can also favor democracy? What do you think?
First question, the numbers, we've taken them from reliable sources such as Freedom House. They have an annual report. And I don't remember exactly if there was an explanation if they are about pornographic sites, etc. But the crux of the matter here is that we know for sure that opposition figures, many of them have been banned in Turkey, especially if they live abroad. And there are tens of thousands of people who have been tried just because on the accusation of insulting the president. And there are many people who are in prison for that. So the numbers, yes, they are important, but actually they really don't matter. There is a widespread censorship in Turkey and authoritarianism, and this is what we've been trying to show. And as I said, these numbers are from these sources, so we did not collate them and we did not produce these numbers. For the second question, if it is an exaggeration, yeah, to a certain extent, it could be an exaggeration. But when I said these things happen in Turkey, I didn't mean that it's the exact number. That if these things are happening in India every week, I'm not saying that these things happen in Turkey every week as well. But you said lynching, it happens in Turkey. Look what's happening to the Syrians who have been in Turkey for about 6-7 years, maybe more. And look what happens to them when there is a fight. Look what happens to Kurds, Kurdish workers in one area. Then there is a rumor that, oh, the Kurdish worker raped a Turkish girl, or a Syrian gang did something to a Turkish lady, or crowds go and lynch them. You see this in the social media. So we cannot say that these things are not happening. And also there is this structural violence as well. It doesn't have to be physical violence in every case. So we have all this structural violence, especially with regards to Alevis. They can't say that they are Alevis. They cannot openly talk about their identity. They have to hide it. If you are a Gülenist in Turkey, you can't say it. There is this violence there. So lynching, it doesn't have to be physical lynching, even though this is also happening. Not maybe in the same scale, such as India, but it's happening. When there is an opportunity, you would have pogroms in Turkey. It happened in the past, in Marash, in other Çorum, in other places against Alevis. It happened against the leftists, etc. So these things are happening, unfortunately, and physical violence against the properties of these people, and physical violence against schools and other places, especially after the mysterious coup attempt in Turkey. These things happened, and there is this potential always there. And if it is not happening because these minorities, they keep silent, they don't talk, they don't show their real identity, they hide their identities. So these are taking place in Turkey. And in some cases, these are supported by the government officials, and with their rhetoric, they keep saying these things. Look what happened to Sezen Aksu just last week. it was a form of violence as well. With the president is saying that we will simply cut your tongue and we will show you because you are attacking our religion. This is also a form of violence. And look what's happening to HDP people. Just a few months ago, their party building in Izmir was attacked, and this guy just with a machine gun killed an innocent young girl there. And last week there was the trial, and he said that, look, I just wanted to kill more, 20 of them, 30 of them, but unfortunately my timing was not good and the meeting didn't start, so I couldn't do it. And he was saying this openly and with a pride, and nobody condemned him. This, you don't need to lynch 1,000 people for that. I mean, just this example shows you that there is this mentality there. And all other Kurds, when they look at this, they learn. All these minorities, they learn. All these Jewish people, they learn. And last decade, we had 30,000 Jews in Turkey. Now we have only 8,000. They are afraid and they are simply running away.
I think we've come, unfortunately, sadly, to the end of our time for the panel today. I want, on behalf of the Centre, to thank our panelists, Isan, Sham, Ali Salim, Kainat, Shaza, and Mahmoud. Thank you so much for the report, number one, which is fantastic. And I again encourage everybody who has joined us today to read the report and share it widely. And to our audience, it's been a great set of participants today. We're really happy to see so many people join along for the panel discussion. We cordially invite you to take a look at the site and join us again for our next panel discussion. And with that, I'll close our event today and wish you all a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.